You're listening to Backbench Drivers. I'm your host, John Lawson, and I'm joined this week for the first time by Libertarian candidate and also recent media celebrity Lachlan Lade to discuss some very relevant topics at the moment. But without further ado, I'll jump right into it. Welcome, Lachlan. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you got involved in politics.
Hey John, thanks for having me. I have to say, social media personality is a new title for me, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I've been in politics actually since I was 16, and I'm 28 now this year. I joined the Liberal Party at a local pub with my parents' permission, and a lot of that was just to have more experiences because the political candidate where I lived was often coming to the school, and just ended up having some conversations with him and thought, might as well learn more about this world. So yeah, from before becoming an adult, I have been engaged somewhat in the system, not playing a big active role, but paying attention as much as I could, trying to understand how it works. Stuck with the Liberals for about 9 years, went to a few national and state conventions. Again, good experiences, got to go down to Canberra and see how the process works. I was affiliated with the Young LNP as well during that period, and good contacts, of course. But the reality is, as time goes on, you start to grow up yourself and you look around and ask, what is actually improving? And I realized by no measure anything in the society is really moving forward. COVID was an eye-opener. I saw Liberals stood for nothing. They just followed the same policies that Labor were advocating for. They were printing, billions, asking us to stay at home. There was no difference. And that really made me realize that, hey, these guys, I can't stand with them, because what do they stand for themselves? Everything on their website was disregarded. And from there, I went on to volunteer with the UAP in the 2020 elections, then to volunteer with One Nation. Again, just searching for people who want to stand for common sense values and put Australia first and not act like tyrants. And then coming into 2024, the Libertarians actually reached out to me after they did a rebrand, and having long called myself actually a Libertarian, well, I was actually quite thrilled to find a party, and then I really thrilled to meet the people behind the party and found a real home there. So yeah, now I'm running in the federal election as a Senate candidate, second on the ticket for the Libertarian Party, and yeah, making plenty of noise on social media.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a pretty relatable story for a lot of people. Your move from central, sort of middle of the road politics further and further to the right as you discovered that things are not the way they seem, and that those who purport to be our representatives in fact represent nothing. So yeah, I think that is very relatable. But I have to say, you don't strike me as a typical libertarian. I mean, that's a very broad title. I know that incorporates everyone from pot smokers, who are often overweight, all the way through to people that are perhaps consider themselves paleo-libertarian, which I've heard people like Birchall Wilson describe themselves as. Where would you place yourself on that spectrum? And I think I've got an idea, but tell us yourself. What do you think?
Yeah, for sure. So actually, paleo-libertarianism is a recent term for me as well, and I think I found great alignment there. You see, I just believed at the core of my beliefs is that I need to live my own life. The government has no role interfering in my life. And so I like to say we're all libertarians to varying degrees. How much influence is that government allowed to have? How much control are they allowed to have over our life? And I really don't think they serve any role influencing me and my family directly. I think the government needs to be maintained, just protect those freedoms, keep them self-transparent, and protect our borders. So in that sense, I'm very libertarian. I just want to live my own life with my own choices, as long as it doesn't harm anybody else. And you've got to realize that whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, as soon as you go towards either of those extremes, you seem to be advocating for more and more government intervention to kind of design society how you might imagine it. Where I think the government, the elected officials, need to lead by example rather than force what they want to see. And so personally, I mean, you probably see, I'm quite patriotic about what Australia should stand for and Australian values. And so I want to embody that myself, lead by example, celebrate our national holidays and our foundational roots, but yet not force that upon people and not control people, as those on the left we're seeing are now doing.
Yeah. So, but whereabouts does that place you in terms of, for example, I've seen you advocate for various what some would consider very nationalist topics. You even mentioned their border control, but I think more broadly, you would also be in favor of some form of immigration restrictionism. At least that's what I've gathered. You, like you said, you're in favor of preserving Australia and its identity and advancing that as well. So I feel like that does sort of give you some nationalist credentials as well. What's your opinion on that?
No, I agree with you. And look, the way I see it is that libertarianism to me is that the citizens of the nation have the freedom to live as they wish, right? But libertarians, especially a libertarian government, needs to protect those individuals. So protecting the border is of the utmost importance to ensure that the citizens can have that freedom. You see, you still need to live in a civil society. And so if you have open borders, well, we're seeing the absolute disaster appearing in the UK, Europe, America. And so I'm not an advocate for that at all. I just believe in the minimal state then interfering in our lives. So, yeah. I guess as well, libertarians are very big advocates for free trade. And I've recently been learning about this, and there's a lot of arguments for and against. Really, unless it comes to national security as well, we want to live in harmony and prosperity. So, yeah, you can have a blend of anything. If I'm a national libertarian, then that's maybe the accurate title.
Yes, yeah. It's not so much the title that I'm concerned with. It's I think that there is a difference in philosophy between nationalism and libertarianism. But what I think is intriguing is that in Australia in particular, where we have no honest nationalist party anymore, at least, I think that there can be an alliance formed between the Libertarian Party, who, led by John Ruddick, has actually been a lot more right-wing than the Liberal Party, which I think that's obvious to see for anyone. And I think that's how he's described the way that he wants to lead the party into. He says he wants to make it sort of like a Greens-esque minor party, which pulls the Liberal Party to the right on various issues. Ruddick himself has been an immigration restrictionist and said that he's willing to work with other elements of the right wing insofar as we're pushing in the same direction. So I think that there's a very valuable connection that can be made there. And you're sort of a representative of that as someone that is both patriotic Australian, pro-Australian identity, recognise a lot of the problems that nationalists do, but at the same time, you still fit the mold of the libertarian. You still do want to reduce government power, which is not necessarily even opposed to nationalism per se, although I do have my criticisms.
Yeah, no, so, okay, you're quite right. I think the important thing is not to get too tied up on what we perceive libertarianism to mean, right? Like, let's say we're a different breed in Australia, because I wouldn't fit in at all with the libertarians that we see in America from what I've identified.
Okay.
We are our own breed of people, and we have our own unique culture and heritage that we must protect. But I just realized if we're going to continually give government power to the government to sort of have the influence in our lives, we're probably going to end up in the same situation that we're in. And that's where I realized it's the small, limited government in all things that we should be pushing for, and then let the citizens, remember this, the citizens that should have all the rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and to go forth in how they see fit, that isn't hindered. And that's the role of a libertarian government. But the government, because we're an Australian country, right? We are Australia. I think those elected officials need to set an example of what they want to see. But
Yeah,
to have
absolutely.
To have that kind of freedom within our society, we have to have a very strict, responsible immigration policy. Those coming here want to actually come here and better themselves, and hence better their family, their community, and then the nation. We can't have, separate political groups with their own political identities, with their own cultures being built in this country. Otherwise, we're going to have conflicts. We won't be an harmonious civil society, right? And
Yes,
that's where I
certainly.
think we really need to be strong on the assimilation and ensuring that we all treat each other how we want to be treated. I mean, as just a little side thing, right? Right now, when I go for a walk every morning with my dog, I'm getting pretty annoyed at the fact that I'm seeing countless Coles trolleys just left everywhere. And I'm seeing people just bringing them from the shops, carting them 20, 30 minutes away and just leaving them. And, that's quite disrespectful. And that's because a lot of other cultures don't realize the civil society and what we expect from one another.
Mm. Yeah, actually, that's something I really want to touch on. So, libertarians so often will overlook I guess there's no other way to say it, but the ethnic component of libertarianism, which is that whether you look at any sort of libertarian group across the West, the vast majority of people who are interested in preserving individual rights and the Western tradition of limited government power are white. There's no way to get around that. And I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon, for the simple fact that so many non-white people or people from the third world come to our countries, not because they necessarily love our freedom, although some might. They often come because they want to be the beneficiaries of our various government programs, which give out free education, free healthcare, and various other things for a very low price. They might even come here and stay on the dole for a long time. And that's not everyone, of course. There are a lot of hard workers. I don't deny that. But I do think that a lot of people come because they either love our economy, they love our living standards or something like that, but not necessarily our freedom. Whereas for the libertarians, they're coming at their love for our country from an ideological perspective. They love the ideas that were developed in our country and our civilization and wish to preserve it. And hence, that's why you see so many libertarian groups and parties represented by the same demographic of people, generally Anglo-Saxon white people. And so I do think that it is in the best interest of libertarians to preserve the demographic makeup of our countries as well. If they want to preserve individual freedom, they can't replace those who believe in individual freedom with those who don't, and probably never will, and have no tradition throughout history of believing in those freedoms. I mean, look at anywhere else in the world and you'll find a totalitarian government or a general history of totalitarianism. I'll let you respond a little bit to that, Lachlan, but what are your thoughts on the intersection between libertarian interests and preserving our demography, which is unabashedly a nationalist issue?
Yeah, well, first thing I'd add is that freedom, that belief in freedom and that desire for freedom isn't an inherent natural born value that humans have. It has to be something that's nurtured and taught. There's a theory or ethics theory called cut flower ethics. And you might pick flowers, right, from the garden, and they'll be beautiful for a day or two, but without water or replanting, they'll inevitably die. And that same goes with freedom. If you don't continually reinforce and help people remember the freedoms that we fought and died for, inevitably that will be lost. So those who are coming here from countries that don't necessarily have the freedoms that we do, who haven't sacrificed and fought the world wars that we have for this element of freedom, they're not going to respect it nor fight for it in the same sense. So that's why, look, a lot of libertarians are very economically minded. And I think actually the prime solution for when you're talking about how migrants will come here looking to take advantage of our economic systems, our welfare systems, is that, again, the responsibility of the government is to ensure that those systems are only for the citizens. And I think once you draw that line, you would help heal a lot of the issues that we have. And I know that people in the party have been advocating that only those residing here, working here for 10 years can then be eligible for citizenship. Now, that means you've got to provide 10 years of contribution to the nation, which is a decent amount of time before you would be eligible for welfare benefits. So going forward, I think that's where we've got to start looking, because we have to have a harmonious, society. But the reality is Australia now, 30% of Australian citizens aren't born here. And although we are a European Christian nation, of which were, made up of Latins, Teutons, and Anglos, coming together to form our own national identity, a lot has changed in recent times. So the path forward is really interesting. But this, this is where I see a lot of our elected officials celebrating days that are not Australian days, like Ramadan, for example. That's not an Australian holiday. And we celebrate the fact that individuals in this country can celebrate that themselves in their own homes. And I would never advocate for the government interfering in that. But this is where myself, as a libertarian of Australia, a nationalist of Australia, I wouldn't celebrate those holidays as a public official. That's not an Australian holiday.
Yeah, right. No, I agree that it is absolutely a desecration by our elected officials to then go and fork over all of their time and energy to these various communities, often to the detriment of the community that built and founded this country, which is European Australians. This is it's something that we see from both sides of the mainstream. We see Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese both wearing a turban and going along to these various ethnic festivals, celebrating religious holidays that we have no interest in. The majority of the population has never practiced and would have been absolutely abhorred by our founders and the founding stock of this nation. I mean, look how much contention there were between Protestants and Catholics, and whether a prime minister was one or the other, or even what Protestant denomination he was. And now you have our prime ministers, they'll go to church once in a while to get some votes, for big holidays. But then the rest of the year, they're talking about the Indian community, how much they're doing for the Jewish community, how much they're doing for this, that, the other.
And that's just to gain votes. And see, our immigration has been politically motivated. And a lot of the immigrants are then voting for Labor because they're seen as more favourable to their culture. But that's the wrong direction, and that's not the goal of immigration. If we're bringing people here, they need to be building, like if we were to bring a heap of Japanese engineers here to build a high-speed rail to connect our cities, citizenship after, that task, I think is a worthy reward. Right? It needs to be to the direct benefit of the current and upcoming Australians. It cannot be politically motivated, because now we're seeing, I think it was the Sikhs down south who are advocating for blasphemy laws. And then we've got the protesters protesting for permanent visas. See, again, that's now becoming a public nuisance and should be shut down by the police. But again, the rights of freedom to speech is the rights of welfare, that should only ever be for the citizens, because they have earned that right. And so that's where I'm particularly strong. Our citizenship, to become a citizen, it should be of the utmost honor, right? Because we have such a fortunate, prosperous, potentially, nation here.
I agree. Nothing is as valuable as our people. We are the country, really. You can even take away parts of the land, which I absolutely don't advocate for. But I mean, as so long as the people persevere, Australia will exist. And yet we find that Australian birth rates are down, and we are bringing in mass numbers of people who have higher birth rates than Australians to come live amongst us. I can't see any trajectory other than eventual replacement of the Australians that built this nation, or descended of those who built this nation. And that will mean the death of Australia when that happens. That is my personal primary motivator in politics, is to prevent and reverse the effects of this replacement migration. Do you think that this is something that is considered a priority among libertarians, or is it something that you prioritize yourself, Lachlan?
It's absolutely a priority, and I know the party themselves are working on policies to help support and enhance the family. I mean, if you've looked at our branding, we understand, the Libertarian Party as a whole understands, that the smallest form of government and the foundation of our nation is the family unit. So without that being protected, without that being able to thrive, well, we look at where we're arriving right now. Like you said, I believe our replacement rate is at 1.5 per woman. So it needs to be at least 2.1 for replacement. So we're well and truly below. But I think this is a consequence of a government who believes, well, we just need to be working more to make more money. It's not. We need to drastically cut back our work hours. We need to cut back the demand on the supply of goods like housing so that we can all afford the basics of living, so we can all have a home. Because without a home, what are the young men in this country working towards if they can't afford that, right? So this was my number one goal. I managed to get my home by 25, but my younger brothers who are 4 or 6 years younger than me, this is a real struggle just to get into a home. And without owning a home, without having land in this country, there's very little connection to the land. There's very little to protect. And that's the foundation for a family. You see, we are well and truly working too much. I was raised on a single income family. That should be achievable for anybody who wishes to pursue it, so that a mother can stay at home and raise the children. Because it's foundational to our nation. And see, this is what we need to be clear. The libertarians truly understand this. We're not, and it's been proven like this all throughout history. Strong families create resilient communities, and resilient communities creates a strong nation. So we're not looking to turn Australia into an open economic zone. We want to preserve the culture, the nation that our fathers created. It's just that we understand a limited government in all things that protects the rights of the citizens is the way that we preserve what we have going long into the future. Because we don't want a far right wing or a far left wing of either side controlling the country.
Oh, well, I might have to disagree with you on the last point, as you might be able to guess. Although what you're describing would definitely be considered far right by most of the media and most of the political establishment, I'd have to say. You're basically only describing what Menzies outlines in his Forgotten People speech. He talks about homes spiritual, homes physical, and he talks about the value of the family and how it is of the utmost importance that the family continues to thrive for the continuation of our race. Now, all of this sort of rhetoric and what you're saying right now is considered extremism, far right, white supremacy, all these things by the mainstream media. I'm sure you don't associate with any of those labels, and they're pretty dubious honors to be awarded with by the media for sure. But nonetheless, what you're describing would be considered far right. And I do think that the Libertarian Party is doing an effective job of growing into what the Greens are to the Labor Party, in that they are sort of a further right wing, or the Greens are a further left wing stalwart that pulls the mainstream to their position. I think that the Libertarian Party needs to become that, and I think if it does that, it will win the support of many Australians who are disenfranchised with the mainstream. We look at One Nation, which for a time represented that voice. Unfortunately, it's just been run in such a poor way that it no longer does. I hope that Ruddy can lead the Libertarian Party into that position where they can be a real benefit to the conversation in Australia and the policies that the government puts forward. But we've talked on this a little bit. You can respond to anything there if you'd like. But would you like to talk a little bit about the media response that you've gotten? You had a recent article, I believe the Courier Mail put out about you. I'll let you speak on that a little bit and what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't think it's far. I mean, you say far right extremism, and yeah, by today's standards, it is, because we've
it's
just
all relative, of course.
Yeah, correct. But I think, again, looking back at history and what is the foundation of every individual to get where they are is a loving family that supported them, and every example of a government that tries to usurp that role takes us down the path of tyranny, because it's the indoctrination of the institutions that we're witnessing right now that creates these radicals that go out there and cause harm to society and disrupt society. It's the nationalists. It's those who love their country. It's those who want to preserve what helped us achieve this, that have been absolutely peaceful, that were protesting during COVID to stand up for what so many of our fathers sacrificed to achieve. It's just we've had it so good, as a lot of people understand, for a long time. And because we never fought for what we have here, we don't have a lot of memories of what in the long history that we've had to sacrifice to achieve this incredible period of time that we're in right now. So, yeah, and you're absolutely right. We do need to be that powerful third option or arm of the Liberals that holds them to account, because it is a long game. And that's why right now we need to achieve the balance of power, probably with One Nation. But One Nation, for me, the issue was that they don't have any branches. It's an incredibly centralized party under the personality of Pauline, who is at retirement, well beyond retirement. And I worry that once she leaves, what will happen to the party? As including Malcolm Roberts. He extraordinary man, but he is past retirement and his time is short. And who will replace the party? I don't know if I could trust them the same. And so looking for a party that is decentralized, that values its members' input, and still has strong nationalist, libertarian values that I think is the future that we're heading into. Well, that's why I've joined the Libertarians. But yeah, come to the news, right? Well, just last week I was supposed to be on Channel 9. Unfortunately, 30 minutes before I went live, I was already there with the cameraman. They called me and cancelled the interview. I have a feeling that major parties caught on and got that squash.
Wow, that's crazy. That close to being on.
Yeah, I didn't post anything until the morning it was supposed to happen because of this concern. And yeah, I was in the city at Kangaroo Point and got the phone call.
That's crazy. That's insane. Cancel culture is alive and well, I suppose.
And they would have just said, look, if you run this guy, we're going to cancel all donations to you, something like that. Yeah.
Well, I do think that you definitely, in how you look, how you live, behave, even how you behave, how you talk, the ideology you have, you really do sort of, I think, you do personify a lot of what mainstream Australia wishes to see from our political leadership. I do think that compare you to the average liberal politician who got to where he is through cronyism, and he's got a bit of a beer gut. He's not particularly inspiring in any way, and if he speaks his mind, then he'll get kicked out of the party. I think that you are a bit of a breath of fresh air, and so it makes sense that they would try to kick you out. They only really go after people who I think do actually interest the public. They don't really attack those necessarily who are irrelevant or have no power of winning over hearts and minds of the general public. So take it as a compliment, I suppose.
Yeah, I do. Thanks, John, for saying that. I mean, look, it was the kings and queens, the nobles that protected their society, protected their families and past, right? And in many ways, I'm just trying to embody those values and set an example, even if it was only for my family. And if I can amplify that voice across the country and other people connect with that identity, well, I mean, I believe it's only to the betterment of the nation. And they were fortunate they banned me because I was going to go very, very hard on digital ID and the censorship of the youth, of which now we're seeing coming full force with the misinformation bill and the recent passing of some new laws today in Queensland I need to look into, or yesterday. But yeah, the other articles, though, frankly, have been pretty positive. So the Courier Mail and the Townsville Bulletin reached out to me and had a few words. I mean, of course, they want to downplay my ability and how serious I am, calling me a pretty boy, which is the first time I've been called that in my life, considering I work pretty hard on the farm in all the mud and blood of the animals. But you got to always remember, all publicity, good or bad, is to our benefit. And Trump is the most optimal example of that throughout his entire campaign. So I'm not ashamed of what anybody would say about me, because it's not I can't control that anyway, right? But overall, I was really happy with the articles that came out. It showed that I am serious, I am getting attention, and I'm a voice that probably is going to have to be listened to, even if many disagree. But I think many more will agree, thankfully.
Yeah, and contrast you with the other offerings of the minor parties as well. Compare you with Pauline or even Malcolm Roberts, as I think he's been saying a lot of good things recently. Craig Kelly, who they're mixed. I've got mixed feelings about. But compare you with any of them, and I mean, you're a young face. You're you go to the gym. You own your own property. I mean, these are things that young guys can actually get interested in, compared to sort of the old and retired that seem to fill the ranks of the rest of the minor parties. Well, but even I think Ruddick's said a lot of good things recently. But he's more of a middle-aged guy. I mean, compare that to you, and if you could actually start to attract a lot of young people to who are nationalistically inclined towards the Libertarian Party, that's a force to be reckoned with. And I don't think that the media or the mainstream wants to even let that get off the ground to begin with.
No, they don't. I would agree with that. And well, look, it's the youth who inherit this nation. It's the youth who will change the world. And there's countless of examples of that throughout history. I think like Alexander the Great was in his early 20s when he went on to conquer most of the known world by the age of 30. And the founding fathers of the United States, Alexander Hamilton was 21. James Monroe, I think, was 18. These were young individuals that were daring to challenge what has been established for decades, but brave enough to envisage, a better future. And that's really all I'm doing. I see just a system that is so convoluted and complicated that works only to the benefit of big corporations and those with wealth, because they can afford to figure it out through, lawyers and accountants and so forth. We need to take things back to a simpler time. And maybe that's, from the farm upbringing that I've had, I really think life is quite simple. But we've just had decades of politicians and bureaucrats who believe through more rules and regulations and through their own ideas on how things should work that they can create a better society. When really, and see, this is the libertarian in me, we just need to strip them out of the system and strip back the rules and regulations to let people go forward and thrive and build as they naturally would without being told what to do. And I hate authority. That's why I've been self-employed most of my adult life. I've always found that I can get things done quicker and more efficiently when I'm left to my own devices. And so, yes, I really want to see people who love this country and are looking to the past and looking for identity to come forward and stand up for what we built. Because we should be so incredibly proud of our nation, right? From England, two civilizations, the English and the Aboriginals, coming together in an empty land to build a nation of, just extreme wealth and capabilities within about 200 years. That's a very proud history, a very proud beginning. And we have our own unique culture that we need to empower and be proud of. So when we have so many of these politicians from every side, Liberal, Labor, Greens, who are talking about truth-seeking inquiries to rewrite our past, and all the shame of who we are and the white guilt, it is a waste of energy that nobody wants to connect with. No one wants to feel ashamed of themselves. We've got to start being a lot more proud of who we are as a people. And that's where I really think that we're going to change the scene here. And the libertarians are very much on side with that. We are one people in this country, under one flag, with one future.
Well, at least that should be the vision of what we try to get back to, once we put our house in order. But no, I agree with a lot of that. Let's talk a little bit about this misinformation bill, which is an example of how the Libertarians and Nationalists can absolutely come together to work on something which will better our nation and also better our political system. So recently we had the Albanese government pushing through this bill, just recently introduced, that seeks to censor social media companies and impose harsh fines on them. I believe 5% of their global income or something like that, if they don't comply with extremely harsh and censorious speech guidelines. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Lachlan, and what your stance is? I can sort of guess, I think, but also what the Libertarian Party is going to do about it.
Yeah, well, look, we're getting into some dark times for Australia because
absolutely. Like if this passes, it's hard to even explain or quantify now just how bad it will be for our country and what it will do to any sort of political dissent. But please continue on.
Well, that's right, because that's entirely why this is coming through. We're seeing, and through social media, through X, Instagram, and the like, an enormous uprising of those who love their country and are standing against these people who have just tried to control us for too long. And they're losing by, I can easily see the narrative. COVID woke a lot of people up, but there's unfortunately still the people in power. And so this, as I see it, with the narrative of just misinformation, is the last attempt to squash dissent. And this is what I mean by when I say I don't want an extreme right-wing government, is we don't want either side thinking that they should restrict speech ever. Because the only solution for speech you don't like is more speech. We have to have a competition of ideas. Otherwise, we regress. We're not moving forward. We're not having a discussion to find the best way ahead. And this is what they have forgotten. Or they know this. The reality is they just want to control the information and control the narrative. But this is an assault on every aspect of society. This is rule of the minority over the majority. We won't even be able to criticize the banking system. And I think quite clearly we're heading into recession. I think that our banking system is at its end. I think that new solutions need to come forward. But yet I'd be silenced for that comment just there, for creating distrust in the established banking system. So quite dark times overall. The libertarians themselves, I mean, but the thing is, this is not just this is not just for the politicians and those politically motivated to be paying attention to. This is something that every single Australian, from the left to the right to the centre, should be making a stand for, to preserve the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, because eventually it will affect you. It'll eventually affect every one of us. You know, if we have to self-censor and be scared of anything that we are to say online or even in person, who knows where this will take us? This will establish a permanent political class. There are so many stories in history and novels, non-fiction and real and fiction, that portray the dystopian times that we're heading into. So we all have a responsibility, and this is what I can do mostly as a candidate for libertarians, is just bring awareness to just how dangerous the path that we're now on is.
Yeah, I don't think ever before we've seen such an overt attempt to censor political dissent in our country. I mean, it's anything that causes harm as defined as emotional harm. And what does that mean? Anything that offends someone. And who is not offended by something? I mean, there are so many that are offended by completely legitimate criticisms. They're sensitive themselves. And so what, they're going to be given power to then hold everyone else to their ridiculous standards? I mean, free speech is necessary, not because you can say any sort of gibberish you want. For example, we had who was it? The Senator Payman, I believe her name is, that who was talking absolute retarded nonsense in Parliament recently.
I didn't understand what she. I understand now what she was doing.
She killed the meme. She killed the meme. I don't know who that was supposed to appeal to, because anyone my age thought that was so cringe. And anyone that's older thought that she is speaking gibberish. So I don't know who that appealed to. Maybe political staffers who have a munted sense of humor or something like. I guess that's it. No. It's not meant for that kind of nonsense. It's actually meant so people can politically dissent. It's not meant to protect harmful material. For example, porn comes to mind, and that's something that when the left was more libertarian, so to speak, in the 80s and 90s, and were responsible for legalizing a lot of very harmful practices, they used the same sort of arguments. I would like to distance myself completely from that and say, I mean, that we clearly know what is harmful and what is necessary. Political dissent is absolutely necessary, especially when we live in such corrupt times. And so the fact that it is specifically targeted at that sort of clamping down on that kind of speech is something that we cannot stomach. We need to completely push back against it. I fear that the Liberal Party will be too weak, though, to actually do that they won't actually stand by their values. So I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have to be challenged in the courts eventually. But we have a long road ahead of us if this passes.
And don't misconflate the fact of, like, the Liberal Party, you say maybe too weak. It's not that they're weak, it's that they want this as much as Labor want this, because they are the political establishment. If they had values or something to stand on, this would easily be rejected.
No, you make a good point. Both Liberal and Labor, they maintain their position by censoring all alternatives. I think back to Tony Abbott in the 90s, who, when One Nation was popping up and it was performing very well, winning 25% of the statewide election for Queensland a couple years after its founding, Tony Abbott was intentionally posted by John Howard, who was Prime Minister at the time, to try and shut down One Nation, and that led to the lawsuits and various other things which did trouble One Nation for a while. And yeah, so the establishment can only survive by maintaining a very, I suppose, a boring, uninterested, uncompetitive scene where they don't receive any actual challenge from genuine criticisms and a genuine alternative. I think again of other nationalist parties, which were absolutely crippled by lawsuits, one after the other, by various activist groups. And I also think of the consensus between the two parties to not discuss immigration restrictionism, because if one were to start speaking about it, they knew that it would be so popular. I mean, majority of Australians have supported immigration restrictionism, according to polls, for over, I think, 50 years at this point, probably more than that. I mean, since our founding was based upon immigration restrictionism in many ways. But I mean, probably for majority of our history, most Australians have been opposed to the current immigration regime. And yet they, both Liberal and Labor, according to Hawke, agreed not to speak about immigration because that would deliver the victory to one or the other. What do you call that? If that was in a private company, that would be considered anti-competitive. That would be taken up with the Fair Work Commission, I'm sure. And yet we have the two political parties which are 1 degree separated on their social issues. I mean, they do have a bit more of a difference in terms of their economic policy. I'll grant them that. But in terms of their social positions, they survive by basically representing nothing so that they can never be attacked by the media. The media leads and they follow in many ways.
Yeah, but this is why we've got to be optimistic, because what is it that they're trying to censor now is social media. The legacy media, the mainstream, more and more Australians, I would beg every week, are realizing it cannot be trusted and it does nothing to inform us. And I've seen polls that show I believe it was actually close to 70% of Australians are losing trust in the mainstream media. So this is why I'm very optimistic, and as us youth who are now using social media are really going to change the narrative and the direction of this country, because we can have these discussions on the subjects that the media would never bring light to, notably immigration. You are right. Look, again, Australia was a very small population. Our immigration, the founding fathers of Australia knew that we had to maintain our cultural identity or else we will become something else. And the most peaceful nations were the Western countries that were of one culture and one race. And they understood that. And so that's why, assimilation, those who come here really need to work to adopt what it means to be an Australian, speak English, treat each other how you want to be treated. But yeah, it's fascinating times that we're in to see these political parties now become one under a different name, push the same policies just to maintain control and silence the dissent. It's shocking, right? I never thought the enemies would be on our own shore, in our own government, but they truly are.
Exactly. And I will point out further, for those who want a more principled argument against this as opposed to something practical, meaning that there will be no dissent from people who disagree with the government, and that is that ostensibly our system is built upon liberalism as its founding ideology, as in we look at the wars of the 20th century and the regimes that rose up supposedly and imposed harsh order upon their own countries and others. And then the current liberal establishment says that everything we do is a reaction against that we cannot allow tyranny to creep in because it led to the horrors of the 20th century. And so that's why everyone must be able to live their life how they choose. But apparently that only means taking it up the butt or doing drugs to your own detriment. It doesn't actually mean disagreeing with the government and wishing for an alternative political order. And so we've sort of found the ends of liberalism. Liberalism requires force to be enforced. To exist in its first place, it needs to be propped up by state power. It can't, there is no, I suppose, liberalism has required authoritarianism to survive. That is a criticism. I would also have the libertarian ideology as an extension of liberalism. Sorry, Lachlan. But I do think that the current establishment has demonstrated that the liberalism of Karl Popper has come about, and the liberalism of Burke has absolutely gone away. That the old English tradition of liberalism combined with British race patriotism or something like that, that has been long discarded, and we now live in the regime of infinite wars for infinite peace, end of history, and democracy for all enforced at by a barrel of a gun. So it is. I do think that it demonstrates the absolute.
Yes. No, well, I think you're quite right. I think, the wars of the last century made nationalism a yucky word that, again, we have to stop being emotional and childish about. We have to take things as they really mean. Um, you see, the role of the government is not to have feelings and care. They need to care, but not have feelings, I guess, where to the point that we're at now. They have to make the honest, real decisions that are to the betterment of their citizens. And that's really where it ends. We're not trying to take care of foreign populations with our foreign aid. We shouldn't be interfering in these foreign wars like in Ukraine and Israel, Palestine. It doesn't serve the benefit of our citizens. We just need to look inward and exemplify and protect what we already have. So, but that's you're right. I think we are sort of at the end of what the liberal order could take us to. We're kind of degenerating, devolving now, and so the pendulum's swinging back in the other direction. We're looking for something to find meaning, a lot, whether that's spiritual, whether that's cultural, something to identify with that isn't just. Well, we're seeing the new identities being born with the alphabet communities. And that's leading to just a number of issues within our own society, the breakdown of society. So the pendulum is swinging back, and something to think about, actually, and this is quite true. Those who are really sticking to the extreme left of what it is now, those who are part of the alphabet communities, they are literally breeding themselves out, whereas conservative populations are having more children than ever. And so there is a natural correction that humanity goes through, and I think we are seeing that.
Yeah, no, you're right. That's something Keith Woods has written a lot about. I'm not sure if you follow him at all, but he's talked about how, it's the Amish, it's the traditional Catholics and various other traditional Christians who will inherit what's left of the West once liberalism and atheism and just generally degeneracy has run its course. I agree with that. I wanted to ask your opinion on something else, but it slipped my mind now. No. Did you have anything else you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, look, don't get tied up on the words libertarian. As always, I'd love to see us actually have individual candidates who don't necessarily even have a political affiliation voted into our parliamentary system. Like an actual real democracy. But it's the natural human sort of order of things to work together to achieve power, right? We're social creatures, and that's why we end up sort of with this two-party system. But if everybody was more engaged and we were just looking at the candidates of our respective jurisdictions, we'd have a very interesting and probably a lot more successful country.
Yeah, I reckon. But ever since our founding parties have existed, so I don't see that going away. I remembered what I wanted to say before. So you mentioned Israel-Palestine, and I wanted to bring that up in regards to this censorship law. I would not be surprised if a large motivation for Albanese wanting to ram this through here and now is the criticism that he's receiving from the left in regards to the treatment of Palestinians and the Australian government's tacit support for that. As you've seen, there have been massive protests recently. They, in fact, turned quite violent. And just as a side note, it's interesting to note how sort of standoffish police have acted towards that community, that political beliefs, as opposed to nationalists, I suppose. I mean, nationalists have their homes broken into, they get arrested and given long jail sentences for criticizing the government, even doing sort of activism work. But meanwhile, you have these pro-Palestinian people rioting in the streets, and they definitely seem to receive a little more leniency, although I will grant that the police have cracked down on them nonetheless, and I do believe that is because they are dissenting against a real power within our country, which is the interests of the Israeli lobby, as we know that has a large influence even over our political leadership, but also our foreign policy as well. So I do think that Albanese coming in and censoring censoring political speech now or attempting to is probably to deal with this genuine criticism he's receiving from his left, which could take a lot of power away from the Labor Party. And I imagine that also a lot of that criticism is coming from within the Labor Party. I imagine a lot of the young people that are involved in Labor these days do not support his government's position on Israel-Palestine. And so he probably wants to even censor that up-and-coming future elite of the party in order to make sure that it doesn't step out of line. Mind you, this is the same Albanese that was once a parliamentary friend of Israel until he gained power and parliamentary friend of Palestine. He was a member of that group until he gained power and suddenly he had to back Israel. So that I think that's quite an interesting transition there. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a large part of it is to stop any valid criticism of him from a base that ordinarily would support the Labor Party. But I'll let you speak a little bit on that, Lachlan, but maybe you could also branch it into, for the final segment of the show, foreign policy in the libertarian world.
Sure. So again, well, who's the boogeyman under the bed, right? It's always the far right extremists. It's the narrative of the media, and so anytime there is a nationalist sort of gathering of any kind, that has to be painted as the absolute evil. What we are seeing, thankfully, and again, social media is to thank, the rise of the extreme left, whether it be desecrating our monuments, the shutting down of traffic, supergluing the hands to the roads, and now this recent protest. But again, this recent protest, the Palestinian protest, this is a failure of the politicians setting an example, of a failure of the immigration policy, because it doesn't involve us by any measure, as far as I can see. And just as the Israel lobby shouldn't be of concern to us either. And this is where we really need to see a change in the country political system, is that the only advocacy groups are Australian advocacy groups, Australian policy, Australia first. So, yeah, the police will inevitably have no choice, I believe, to crack down on these protests as harshly as they need to, because they were quite violent, throwing the acid on the police horses and so forth. But this is, I probably don't need to say much more there, apart from the fact that it shouldn't involve us. It shouldn't really be an issue that is heavily discussed. And so that goes into foreign policy, and I know the libertarians as a whole want to stop foreign aid, because a lot of it, again, only serves to enrich the government and the political elite in that country as it filters through the different levels of government before it reaches the people. And inevitably, right now, when we have the struggles that we have with our own people, with the cost crises, then we need all of those resources and money right here at home. Only if the enemy were to be threatening our very shores should we be going to fight. But maybe something we could learn from Israel is their Iron Dome. I'd like to see our national security infrastructure protected with some Iron Domes in Australia.
It sounds like broadly you're talking about increasing Australian independence and autonomy within the world. What would you say about political alliances? Would we remain within the American bloc Western world order? Or would we be trying to transition towards full autonomy, sort of a Switzerland-type model?
Yeah, this is a very interesting conversation. Now, and look, I actually would like to see Australia kind of be the Switzerland of Oceania. The reality is we have a massive trade relationship with our Northern Asian countries, and that's to our benefit. But at the same time, the world is separating. We're seeing the formation of BRICS, which is I think it's close to 2/3 of the world's population now. So that's an enormous initiative that's going to leave the West relatively isolated. BRICS will control basically most of the land mass from China, Russia, all the way into Africa. I believe even Mexico and Brazil are looking to join. And then you've got the ocean trade routes potentially between America, Australia, Europe, and the United Kingdom. But look, we shouldn't... we should never be looking for more wars in the future. Peace could have been achieved in all the world wars that we've faced before it went to a war. We could have had peace if cooler minds prevailed and more conversations occurred. Same in the Ukraine-Russian war, right? There was many peace deals potentially. If treaties were respected, it never had to get to where it's at. Probably same in Israel-Palestine. So, look, I think Australia's goal is to be as self-sufficient as possible. to be as peaceful as possible, to look to our own national interests, putting our people first, and maintaining good relationships with all people around the world. And that's part of what globalization, not globalism, globalization has helped to accomplish, the working together of different nations for the benefit of their people. And that is, one of the biggest and strongest arguments for free trade, is that because it creates a dependency on one another between nations, it's the ultimate trade policy to achieve great lasting peace. So it's an interesting conversation, and we have to watch how the world moves going into the future. I wouldn't know the right direction for Australia now. Apart from that, we definitely want to maintain peaceful relations with everybody, trade with everybody, and we should probably be aiming to be the Switzerland of Oceania.
Yeah, no, I like that. I basically just agree with what you're saying. We need an Australia first foreign policy. And frankly, Australia is not benefited by many of the wars taking place across the other side of the world. We don't need to be involved with it. And really the only reason we are is because of our dependence on America for security. So any policy which increases our own security, our own independence and autonomy is something that I support. So we need to probably increase our military power. We need to nuclearize. And aside from that, we just need to basically say no to our allies sometimes. We're not going to come and step in and go, point our guns at people at your behest. But that brings us towards the end of the episode, Lachlan. I'll let you give some final thoughts and tell people where they can find your content.
Yeah, well, thanks, John. So on the social media platforms, you can find me under the DunderViking, which means down under Viking. Under Lachlan Lade, it should be pretty easy to find. But yeah, look, the future's optimistic. It really is, especially as the younger generations realize that politics is something we can't be apathetic about. It's something we have to play a role in, especially as younger generations, like myself, who realize, I'm proud to be an Australian. I'm proud of our history. I'm proud of our culture, and I want to preserve that. I want to have the same possibilities and the same nation that my parents and grandparents grew up in. But the reality is we had a political class that served themselves for too long, that led politically fueled immigration, that only ever brought in more laws to empower themselves and the status quo. And we just need to have the realization that everybody has a product to sell. My product is that, we have to start valuing and loving who we are, our nation, Australia, and not be afraid of what other people are going to say about us. It's a long journey, but there's an enormous grassroots uprising that is taking place. And the pendulum is swinging back the other way. There is self-correction in all things, and we're seeing this throughout the world right now. All nations are looking inward to exemplify who they are. And that's a good thing. The whole reason that we travel this planet and to different nations is to experience other cultures. So let us embody and exemplify what it means to be an Australian, so that we have something to share that is unique with the rest of the world. That's really how I see it when it comes to why we should be so proud of preserving what we have.
Yep, I agree with that. And I just want to add to that, not only do we want to preserve what we have been given in this country, we want to advance it. We want to raise Australia to new heights, which just can't be done under the current sclerotic political establishment. And so it is important that we start to replace those in power with those who really do authentically represent what we want to see in our country, that represent Australia first leadership. And so that's why I'd like to say, if you agree with anything Lachlan says, it is your duty to get out and support him. If you're not interested in getting involved in the Liberals and working quietly to change the party from the inside out, like many I know are doing, I recommend as a second best option as far as political involvement goes, backing candidates such as Lachlan, who do represent maybe not 100% of what we agree with, but 90% or 99%, and is certainly a much better alternative than anything in power at the moment. So yeah, if you have time, if you're interested, I highly recommend that you go and help out people like Lachlan, or specifically Lachlan in this case, and dedicate your time to it. I mean, nothing changes unless we actually get involved, and there's no use talking about things if at the end of the day you don't get involved. Otherwise, this is just another form of entertainment to you. You might as well go switch over and watch some Netflix because it might be more entertaining in a lot of ways. But if you actually are passionate about seeing our country improve, you need to get out there and help yourself. So yes, I encourage people to go help out Lachlan. That brings us towards the end of the episode. Thank you for joining me this week, Lachlan. You can find all of my content at thenationalobserver.co. And I'll repeat that, that's thenationalobserver.co. But also subscribe to our YouTube. I'm on X and Telegram at John Lawson _TNO, which stands for The National Observer. And that's it. Have a great rest of your week.